the context of the novel through the 19th century and beyond. Let us move now to give an overview of the 19th century and the period immediately after the main century of our concern. I will be brief as our main focus is the 19th century, but as we have mentioned, what came before, now we must also what came during in overview and after. The 19th century began in earnestness and with a sense of moral purpose, as its realism, under pressure from the Romantic movement, grew into a celebration of the passions, which became the melodrama of social types. As Stanislavski pointed out, based on his readings of Russian literary commentators, the French Revolution gave birth to a new, more democratic realism, absolutely hand in hand with a view of the value of transmitted direct emotion, especially extreme and stylized emotion, that is, the melodrama, which was in fact a mixed genre, and frustratingly so, as far as Stanislavski was concerned, at once both real and exaggeratedly unreal, and even telling for us, indicating, signalling what emotion to have in a stock way. And these two parts, both the realistic and the exaggeratedly unreal, were inseparable. The real was used as the basis from which heightened emotion could be launched. The two parts remained as inseparable as the eggs and flour of a cake. And as the decades proceeded, this became increasingly so, as time moved further away from Diderot's century through the iconic detachment of Jane Austen towards Charles Dickens, and then the power of sentiment grew, as can be seen in the tale of the death of Little Nell. In Stanislavski's argument, melodrama was a first push at realism, and one which was only partially successful. And as the melodrama and sentimentality began to take over, a new push at realism was sought. One might even see the nihilists and Emile Zola's Therese Raquin in 1868 and Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment in 1866 as attempts to reach what is true, or at least more emotionally honest than not, through a negation of the rules of direct sentiment, a deliberate shock to the expectation for stock emotions of melodrama. The 19th century sees a developing continuity from the more epistolatory style of Richardson's Clarissa to the more personal diary like Jane Austen, to the more far-side tall tale of wild rebellious passions narrated in Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, a journey from external manners to inner feelings to expressing those feelings. Yet at the same time, there is a contemporaneous counter-movement expressing the real through history, developing a sense of our place in history with the novels of Sir Walter Scott and William Makepeace Thackeray. There is also the third and most English of approaches to story and performance, that of irony and humour, the half-serious, half-ironic world of Anthony Trollope. Then, after the midpoint of the 19th century, there is a new push at realism with Elizabeth Gaskell's account of industrial relations and the drama of a strike, and growing urban disillusionment. In the later Dickens, there is the affirmative joy that things will be all right at the end of Oliver, becoming less certain in David Copperfield and Dombey and Son, and in Bleak House in particular, one gets a sense of a changing society and a changing Dickens, with the arrival of the police detective and, most significantly, in Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, we have the arrival of the trains, changing forever the novel from the story of one locale. It is this latter, for the first time, connecting city with city within a day, that forges the greatest change on the novel since its inception, where one may have one reputation or life or family in one town and its opposite in another. There is also later a sense of the growing emancipation or struggle for emancipation of women with the arrival of Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper in 1892 and Kate Chopin's The Story of an Hour in 1894. Perhaps with the new industrial age, it is the arrival of technology, preempted by Jules Verne in French and English, and then H.G. Wells, at the close of the 19th century, that ushers in a change or discontinuity. Suddenly, sometime around the late 1880s, the novel's preoccupations with the society and women and marriage shift towards a much more concise, more single-focused, more escapist novella form, not seen since the wild apocalyptic and Gnostic literature of the early centuries AD. We have The Time Machine, War of the Worlds, The Invisible Man, Cyril's Black Beauty, a story about class from the point of view of horse, and Conrad's Heart of Darkness, a journey upriver and back through colonial time. Suddenly literature is more fantastic, shorter, more fanciful, no longer concerned by the limitations of a contemporaneous social realism for evenings in the parlour in social discussion with the family, but now more work for an individual in a short reading for a weekend or on a train. Nothing characterises this change more than the difference between the mid-18th century Richardson's portrayal of the maltreated Clarissa being in fact the most innocent and eloquent of voices in an entirely familiar material social reality, to H.G. Wells's concern for the inevitable fate of the earth at the end of time, taken there by the power of a time machine to see giant crabs skulking along the shoreline of evaporating oceans under a giant red sun as the earth dies. As the 19th century came to its end, the novel shortened to be more industrially efficient in man-hours for the novelist and the reader, and more technological, and whether by balloon, railway, submarine or time machine, it sought escape. It is interesting that the range of imagination should seek both greater realism and escape from that realism, or to combine them into the most realistic possible portrayal of the unlikely and impossible. While at the dawn of the 20th century there was Conrad sailing the oceans of a new world, which we may say set out some possibilities for a future Hemingway, at the same time the escapism continued with The Wizard of Oz in 1900 and Peter Pan in 1904, appearing first as a stage production but soon after in writing by the same author, J.M. Barrie. It is interesting to note that the 19th century saw the birth of so many now familiar genres: the domestic realism of Anne Bronte's The Tenant of Wilfell Hall, the historical novel in Scott's Waverley, the melodramatic moral tale of childhood in Oliver Twist, the passionate romantic ghost story of Wuthering Heights, the Bildungsroman coming-of-age or growing-up novel of Jane Eyre, the crime detective novel of Wilkie Collins' The Moonstone, and murder mystery of The Woman in White, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, and the industrial and urban novel of Gaskell's Anne Barton, and of the arrival of science fiction après Jules Verne with H.G. Wells. This escapist dream of the turn of the century, of Edwardian England and the Belle Epoque, which extended from the mid-1870s to 1914, and of Sherlock Holmes gentlemanly doing good, continues until, with a shock like a shell landing on a chateau, the Great War begins, and the scale of death, the appalling conditions, the deadly results of international conflict bring a new realism to the ashes of the old patriotism, and to the societies of evening attire a sense of shattering and of momentariness, a breach in continuity, of social upheaval and starkly ironic juxtapositions of insincerity and inadequacy, a cynical despairing confusion in the eye of the storm. And as the smoke clears on the shattered past, bringing in modernism with such force, James Joyce's Ulysses in 1922 and Virginia Woolf's The Lighthouse in 1927 blow to smithereens the certainties and comfortable conventions of Victorian morality, and that presumptuous middle-of-the-road decent all-rounder is forever fractured into a more shocked, disintegrated, on-the-whole discordant and indeed more diverse society. Scott Fitzgerald would find himself rooting for Gatsby despite himself. Hemingway would discover a new world as though he were the first there, or the first to write about it. And James Baldwin, in answer to Conrad's repeated use of derogatory terms, would describe in eloquent detail the world as he sees it, as a major fictive voice who is black. Major work not in English immediately after the 19th century. As we bring our quick review of the 19th century to a close, I will just make one point of the tremendous change in social position and expectations of women authors between Jane Austen at the start of the century and the new critique of Chopin and Gilman. With Kate Chopin's The Story of an Eye in 1894 and The Yellow Wallpaper in 1892 with Charlotte Perkins Gilman, however much they are works of objection and critique and political objection, which they are, nevertheless they do convey a society that is more affluent, of a more established female authorship in relative comparison to the earlier part of the century when Charlotte Bronte decided she should publish under an assumed name, Cora Bell, so that she could be thought of as a man, and into an industrial age of more secure, more able, more insistent to critique the world of men and to do so directly and politically. The most, I should have mentioned before, the major work not in English immediately after the 19th century is, of course, Proust's Salon Recherche de Temps Perdu. 19th century works in other languages, having considered them before and after of our literary focus, and just before we turn to the 19th century novel in English, a quick consideration of some of the 19th century's major works of the novel not published in English. This list does, of course, include some of the greatest works ever written and several contenders for the title of the greatest novel of all time. I will point out the quality of writing in Gustave Flaubert's Madame Bovary in 1856, and that Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov in 1879 is of the utmost serious ethical consideration. To cut the mature and experienced from their accustomed complacency, to turn upon our naive certainties of social life, to face us with our own presumptions and confront us with a lonelier, sadder, unidealistic, truer world of mature understanding. And I would agree with the notably critical Ludwig Wittgenstein that Leo Tolstoy's What I Believe in 1884 is the greatest essay ever written, and really, if you have not, I would suggest that you